morning, everyone, and welcome to the special meeting for the Board of Supervisors on August 27, 2013. Can we all rise for the pledge, and led by Supervisor Derek Cruz.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Can I have a motion for a certificate of posting?
So moved.
Second.
All those fair say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, hearing none. We'll move to a regular agenda. CEO Espinosa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, today your board had asked us to come back, I believe it was the first meeting in August at a regular board meeting, with a general plan update, a special board meeting. So today's the day. Today's the day that we've asked Myron to come up here to give a presentation to your board. And what we're going to be discussing with your board is the community study areas, just overall, the general plan, where we're at, timeline, and basically a few other items. So we have Byron Turner here, our interim planning director, here to give the presentation. Byron?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to cover a few topics today. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what the general plan is. We're going to discuss what the general plan elements are, the discussion between mandatory versus non-mandatory, the new community study areas, issues with the land use map, the question of flexibility, and the next steps. So the general plan is required by state law. It is the constitution governing future physical development in the county. It typically covers a cycle of 15 to 20 years out. The housing element is updated separately. Actually, we've already begun working on the next housing element now. And the general plan, by state law, has 7 mandatory elements. Those mandatory elements are land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, and safety. All general plans are different. Sometimes they put elements together. Sometimes they have one element will cover multiple items here. Our draft general plan has 8 elements, and this is the draft general plan, 8 elements covering all 7 of the different requirements. We also have 3 optional elements in economic development, the public facilities and services element, and the administration element. I wanted to discuss greenhouse gases also. A general plan also must include an analysis of greenhouse gas reduction and sustainability pursuant to AB 32 and SB 375. There has been a lot of discussion about this item. The previous consultant and any future consultants will be instructed to redo the GHG study that was done for this project. There were some flaws in the methodology, so that work will be undertaken. The main item of discussion today, I think, is the new community study areas. This is what we really need to know from the board is what your vision of growth is for the future of this county. Do you accommodate some future growth in new unincorporated communities or focus development around cities where the infrastructure already currently exists? The definition of new community in the new general plan is intentionally flexible in order to allow proposals for a variety of project types that would generally increase development density, which is dwelling units per acre, above the underlying land use designation. Now, the land within the new community study areas has been identified as potentially appropriate for more intense development for a variety of reasons. This definition I have behind me, proximity to existing job centers, good access to existing transportation corridors, opportunities to provide public transit, opportunities for reducing vehicle miles traveled and traffic congestion, fewer impacts to high-value agricultural land, and opportunities for permanent preservation of open space. This is pretty much the extent of the definition we have in our current draft general plan. It does not, however, explain why those locations were chosen at all. Behind me, we have identifying the 4 new community study areas that were brought before the board in the past and approved on 2 different occasions. Although it's not really defined within the draft general plan, The new community study areas are located generally where development interest has taken place. Also were identified by the opportunities and constraints analysis, which was a map that was developed early on in the process, which, as much as we could, identified constraints to development such as high slopes or Williamson Act or airport safety zones, and layered those on top of each other to show where areas that might develop may be appropriate. Also, the area east of Fairview where there's currently residential development on 5-acre zoning, currently identified as agriculture. That's not necessarily a place where we want a new town, but it is a place we might want to look at potentially changing the density. So I will return to this map later later today in the presentation, but I wanted to cover a couple other items first. We also can discuss the land use plan. This was a discussion item that came up at the last meeting. There was some discussion about amending the area around Aromas and as well as Tres Pinos, amending the winery and hospitality overlay. The land use plan that I will show you next was approved by the board on April 26, 2011. So this was approved by this board. Community requests and the GPAC, this is important. When specific requests to identify property came in to the planning department and then subsequently either forwarded to the GPAC or held by the planning department, we didn't always give it to them. The GPAC decided that they did not want to be the ones applying value to specific property by saying this area should be commercial or this area should be higher density residential. It's much like the TDC discussion we had last week. So instead, it was determined that that should happen at the Planning Commission level. Now, this project never got to the Planning Commission, so there's still room to make these changes, but we never were able to make it to the Planning Commission to have the public come in and weigh in on, well, I think this area should be changed and I think that area should be changed. So this is the land use plan. There are also some dots, some nodes that are identified at intersections. Those are areas that are identified as potential for future commercial development as well. But again, no identification of specific properties, just general areas. Another item that came up last week or when we discussed this last was the economic development element. It's an optional element. That element identifies 42 goals and 9 programs to support existing businesses, attract new businesses, and support tourism. If there's additional items that this board would like to see in there, or the public can tell us, we're open to discussion. Some other items that we can discuss today, flexibility in the language. There's been talk about changing shalls to shoulds where possible, and I wanted to point out that you can't simply just run a spell check and change all the shalls to shoulds. Some items are dictated by state law. Others are for mitigation purposes, but the board may choose to not mitigate a specific impact if they wish to. You know, there was a lot of discussion about the mitigation measures in the EIR that came out, and the board has the ability to make a statement of overriding considerations on those mitigation measures if they did not want to implement them. But that's a discussion when we get there. I also want to talk about an RFP versus RFQ. We came before you before with an RFP to solicit consultants to finish the general plan. Due to the lack of a defined scope, the county may wish to hire a consultant first and then work on a scope and a budget. You know, from speaking with consultants, our question was so open-ended, it was hard for anyone to give a time frame and a cost to what we were asking them to do. So the next steps, we would like to hear from the public. We would like the board to make a decision today regarding the new community study areas and discuss any other items and give staff direction. In your packet, it did include a chronology of every time a board action was taken on this item, on the general plan, so you can see where you've been. And I'm available for any questions, but I'll leave this map behind me if you want to start talking about new community study areas. And like I said, I'm available for any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Turner. Any questions? Supervisor Barrios?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You referred to the scope of work being too broad. Are you referring to the RFP that we are planning to
Yes,
put out
the
there.
RFP that we did not send out
Right.
because we want to have this meeting first, but because finish the general plan is a pretty broad task, and so it was tough for the consultants I spoke to. It was tough for them to give me a number and a time frame because a lot of work is going to go into figuring out where we leave off, and so that's why I have that item in there. Is it might be wiser to hire a consultant and then work with them to define what we're going to do to finish the job.
And Byron, you don't think that we can do that, knowing what it is that we want in the general plan, that we can define it ourselves because we've given direction already?
We might be able to focus it down, and after today, if this board feels that you've given, and if we feel we've got enough direction that we can then amend the RFP to send it out, and there's no harm in sending it out too and seeing what we get back.
Well, that's my point, I think, is that if you don't send it out, you really are not going to find out how doable
Yeah.
and the
No,
price.
that's true.
And I'm just thinking, if you add another step and put in a consultant, now you're adding more dollars, and it's like, okay, where does this end?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my concern. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Munzer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Byron, I know you touched on the EIR, the greenhouse gas emissions, but I just want to make it absolutely clear that we are aware that our sub-consultant tried to meet the state mandates for greenhouse gas emissions on the back of the cattle industry. And we have said that that is not acceptable and that needs to be revised and redone, because we are not going to sit here and assume that, or do we have any intention of reducing our cattle industry by 80%? So I just want to make that absolutely clear that that is not the intent of this board at all, and we are aware of the problem in the EIR, and we have already started steps to correct that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Supervisor Rivas?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump into it because I don't want to stay here all day. And that's new study areas. I think that, so the question I have for Byron and really for my colleagues is, we've had a discussion on these study areas several times. I've had my concerns, which I still have my concerns about these study areas, and primarily my concern is about the vagueness of the study areas. I understand why they are vague, but I think that there still needs to be some, what I would like to see is some clarity behind these study areas. And although, since our last meeting, I've had some discussions, obviously, with several, some constituents here in San Diego County, with some special interests here in San Diego County, and I think I think moving forward, these study areas are important. I may not agree with the location of some of the study areas, but I think that, I can't get wrapped up in this idea that I oppose a certain study area because of a potential development that's coming in the future. I think that's bad policy. I can't base my decision to eliminate all study areas based on a potential project that, it doesn't even exist as of right now. I think I have to reserve my reservations about a project until we have a project before us. But moving forward, I think, Byron, you highlighted the definition of a new study area. And when I look through, the comments that we've made as a board, when I look through the decisions that have been made, and when I look through the general plan itself, the policy document, I see a lot of evidence supporting these special study areas. And so the research that I've done when I've researched other the general plans, I see their special study areas are much more, they're comprehensive as opposed to ours, which is extremely vague. And so I think what makes a lot of sense, and I guess the question for Byron is, if this is doable, is I think that when working with these study areas, that we need to provide a general structure and understanding and essentially a vision to these study areas. And what I would like to see done is, I think I would like to see a brief an explanation or a narrative on each one of these study areas, because I want to bring some clarity as to, why these specific, these designations, why they're important and why they're study areas. And I think that any type of narrative needs to have a brief, a description of the conditions in these study areas, because they're all very different. I think that some background information that explains why the area is a special study area would be important, kind of like a historical overview of the working history of these study areas. And then, if possible, I think any information related to city and county coordination and managing the future of the areas is important. I think that I'm satisfied moving forward if we can get a brief narrative. Not only, am I satisfied, but I think it's a benefit for our residents, so that way they understand why they're study areas, what they are, and why they're important for our future. I think that when you look at everything we're trying to accomplish as a board, it's about establishing a vision. And I know that we've all sat on, the visioning panels through Vision San Benito. We've all met with local residents that, we're all working to improve our community. Well, this is our opportunity. As a board, this is our opportunity to work together to get a comprehensive general plan update to hopefully drive our local economy up and into the future. I mean, I think that's extremely important. I know that when we look at a general plan, we may have different ideas as far as what we want our county to look like, or how we expect the general plan to look, to look like once this document is done. But what I'm looking for is, I want a general plan that's going to have an element of predictability, and that's why these study areas, they give us that predictability, because we're asking local or outside investors to look at our community that we want to improve. And I think that in the end, whatever project comes here, as a board, we have the say whether we give that project the green light or not. But I think moving forward, looking at these study areas, this is extremely important to me, and I hope that the board will consider at least moving forward with some type of narrative, and not just a general narrative on the study area per se, but each study area individually. I think it's important that we have a good understanding of these areas. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have a question for you, Supervisor Rivas. A narrative as far as a description of possible projects, or a narrative as far as the environmental
Well, like I said,
circumstances,
right.
A narrative involving economic considerations, because it's a pretty tall task. What concerns me a little bit, we're asked staff to do quite a bit of work on each of those study areas, and there may be another study area out there that's not on the map yet. And that's a lot of work, and the more work we pull into this, the longer it will take to kind of wrap
Right.
up this general plan. And as you're aware, and probably most of the folks out here are aware, I'm very much against the establishment of boundary study areas. I kind of think we would be money ahead to establish special study areas as an application is submitted to the planning department for potential growth, and a request is made through a general plan amendment and going through that process.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be a more viable and feasible way for the county to proceed?
Well, I think when I talk about a narrative, I'm talking about a brief, extremely brief overview of these specific study areas. And it's not a comprehensive, because we have to keep in mind it's a general plan, right? It's general. A lot of the information planning, I'm assuming, already has. And like I said, in the examples that I looked at, these narratives were no more than 3, sometimes 4 paragraphs long, and a lot of it was historical. A lot of it talked about the property itself, what the acreage was, what the benefit of a specific area was, maybe access to specific corridors, maybe access to specific resources. I don't know. But, so I guess, for our planning director, we already have a lot of this information, right, Byron? I mean,
Yes, yeah.
so for me, it's just a matter of getting that information together and providing a narrative on each one of these study areas, so we, as a board and the public, could better understand what's significant about these study areas.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Supervisor David Cruz?
I honestly believe that Supervisor Rivas does have a point, and I think he's interesting and just by listening to his conversation, I think I really did a lot of research into this matter, and I think it's merit that we discussed his ideas from a general perspective. I think he's on the right direction, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have one more comment based on Supervisor Rivas, because as I read through the information that Byron gave us, this is what I wrote on here. After reading the intent of the new community study areas, I wrote, these are key reasons, and they are key reasons, that I need to point out that the GPAC has done a lot of hard work. They did all the groundwork that we're discussing now. They have stated these reasons that Byron has brought forward once again to us, for us to review. So I wrote, these are key reasons and perhaps should be stated in the GP so that it is clear why they were chosen in the first place. And it really all goes back to very broad, very general, but the proximity to existing job centers, transportation corridors, opportunities to provide public transit, it goes on and on. General, but at the same time, the whys. And if we can state those whys on our general plan, you know, really, they're the whys of the GPAC. And we agreed with them back in 2011. So I would support that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And just what you stated, I support those goals and concepts and establishment of, within our policies for growth. My only question is that, why does it have to be within those boundaries that are on the map there? Why can't, across the street there on the lower box that's identified, why can't that guy have a growth plan or development plan? That's, there's not a whole lot of logic other than drawing some circles on there. Those are not defined by property ownership. It's not defined by, anything of interest up to this point. Some of it's not defined by interests of development that we currently have. Areas that have expressed some development are not included, and I want to make a case that we have to be very careful how we do this, because what we're doing is entitling. And the last time that a Board of Supervisors did this was case in point, which is 5-acre zoning in AP areas. San Juan Valley, San Juan Canyon, Aromas, out there at Fairview. And the idea with 5-acre zoning, when that was established, was to give the landowner the opportunity to save his farm. It wasn't to give an entitlement to put in big, parcels and splits and maps, tentative maps and so forth. The idea was to, if he had a little rough year or a couple of rough years, that he could sell a portion of his property and stay on it. Or if his son wanted a parcel, a house on the farm, you could split it off, and you don't have to encumber the entire farm for the son to own a house. Because as we all know, you have to go to the bank and borrow money. And I know if I had a son, I certainly don't want to encumber my whole place just so he could have a house. But that was the idea of it. And also, some farmers need extra income for retirement. And you don't have to sell the whole place to get your retirement. Well, that was the idea of the 5-acre parcels. What ended up happening was an entitlement that led to a lot of pieces that is really is not conducive to agriculture production. You know, some are. You know, I've got a couple of small pieces, but then I also could show you just as many pieces that contain absolutely nothing. There are weed patches. I could show you other areas that people have split their property that probably we shouldn't have the splits. Up in San Juan Canyon, for instance, water is very tenuous up in that area, but they have an entitlement. I think out there, you know, District 1, you have a lot of 5-acre parcels and former orchards and things. You know, it turned into kind of a urban-rural type of sprawl situation. I think we have that in the county. I prefer higher densities, a growth plan that's brought forward to the county that provides clear benefit to San Diego County, as well as being a profitable, you know, development for the developer and property owner. But it needs to be done on an individual basis, and that could be reviewed by the county and transparent to the people of San Diego County. And with these, you know, growth community study areas, I really question whether or not this is a really good practice or standard practice for a general plan revision, especially if we don't have a specific application requesting those entitlements. And we have had growth and development in this county, projects, a number of them that have been successful. They're built. You just go right out here in any of our districts. So it's not like we need this to encourage residential growth. We'll get it anyway. I'm from the thought that our county is going to grow. We have to have housing and opportunities here, but that should try to be emphasized closer in and around the city of Hollister. Doesn't necessarily have to be in the city limits, absolutely not. I think Del Webb is a potential project that shows clear benefit to San Diego County in the Transfer Development Credit Program. If we go with these specific areas, you might as well throw those programs out. Because they're entitled. They're already entitled to have higher densities. So why would they go and participate in a program like that? We also have to consider the fact that water and water treatment is a very expensive proposition. Hollister and the county is participating in doing those projects regardless where the growth is to occur. Do we really want to encourage and emphasize growth to go outside of those areas and leave that burden to our current citizens? I believe a couple of those spots up there also will lead to the devaluation of property and homes in San Diego County. I mean in Hollister particularly. And I don't think it's fair. Those are not benefits to our current citizens, not benefits to the projects that we have already approved and are working on currently. And at the same time, you know, I'm pretty concerned about, you know, the work that we have done as environmental work justifying our entire general plan. The more complex and more circles we have out there, the bigger the target is as far as, you know, justifying adequate environmental justification. I've mentioned publicly, I'll mention publicly again, Rocks Road. They have no water. And we have it as as an area of special study that for potential higher density of growth. And until the day, you know, how many mistakes do we have to make and history repeat itself that we would approve an area such as that? Narrative or no narrative, I could tell you there's no water out there. Been studied time and time again. And the water would have to come from the Palro Valley, and Palro Valley has some real issues. They can't supply water to themselves, much less any growth in our county. So, and that's just one, and I could go on. But I will not support any special study area because I see areas on that map that should have more growth that are not circles. And I see areas that are circles up there that shouldn't be there, at least within this time frame that we have in this horizon of a general plan. And the merits of a project coming forward and the benefits that it provides the people of San Benito is what should carry the flag and the day for residential development in the unincorporated areas. So that's my stance on it. I guess that's it. That's all. Get off my sandbox. Any other comments from the board before I open it up for public comment on? I will proceed with the determination whether we're do the community study areas or not, and then we'll move on to the second agenda item.
One more comment, Mr. Chair. You use some really strong language in entitlement. I don't believe that a new community study area entitles anybody for anything. I mean, they have to jump through all the hoops before they're entitled to anything. If there's no water, and Byron, there's no approval, right? I mean, water is a huge requirement among other things. So is entitlement the word that really applies to new community areas? I didn't believe so. And maybe I should be asking council.
Well, yeah. Well, you know, the reason I use that, Supervisor Barrios, is that if that was the case, then why are we putting circles on the map anyway? And there's been some development interest that is pretty adamant that those designations stay in place. They already do know that they have to submit an application, they have to do environmental work, they have to submit for a general plan amendment.
Right.
They're not gaining that much. But you have to ask yourself, what happens if you take those circles off? Why would they be that upset about it anyhow? And they will be.
Well, I wasn't thinking about people that are interested in it. What I was thinking about is supporting the GPAC recommendation, because when I read through all of this, their intent was to prevent sprawl. And that was the reason for identifying these areas so that they would protect prime ag land, they would preserve it. But back to my question, I'd like an answer to that. I mean,
From me?
from you. In general, if nothing else. I mean, I know I put...
So, in the legal realm, the word entitlement is a term of art if you're using it that way. And entitlement in a project means that the project has gone through full development and review, and the maps have been approved, and there's some sort of vested right after all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. And so one way to use the word entitlement means that you're an applicant or a developer that has gone through the process and has received the benefits of all the decisions, and now you're at the point where you can construct your project
And it would be difficult for the county at that point to tell you not to go forward with your projects. You are entitled to proceed with your project. I don't know if that's how Supervisor Botello was using the word. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think entitlement here means that in the terms of the general plan, you have a general plan that is saying growth is being contemplated in these areas, as opposed to a general plan that says no growth outside the city of Hollister. So it's not necessarily a legal entitlement, but it is a device, a denomination that would allow new growth to take place in those areas without having someone come in and say, your general plan prohibits this.
Prohibits, okay. But they still have to go through a process.
Yeah, I think that's been
There's
said time and time again. Any individual project that comes forward, whether in the new community study area or not, has to go through the full development process, which would include perhaps a specific plan, CEQA analysis, planning commission, board, public hearings, maybe even a general plan amendment.
Okay, thank you. That was very clear. Thanks.
Okay. If you're done,
Good.
Supervisor
Yeah.
Rivas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You know, I've thought long and hard, as I expressed in my comments earlier, I thought long and hard about whether I wanted to support an effort to remove the designations or to leave them in place. And I think that we could all remember a time when we go to a community and we're extremely impressed. We're impressed by the roads, we're impressed by the development, we're impressed by the businesses. And when I sit down and I thought about it, great communities are not created by accident. They're well planned. They're well thought out. If we remove these designations, the future of this county, in my opinion, our local economy, whether we want to move forward with innovative efforts to design our community in a specific way, is kind of thrown out the window. Certainly, we've got to look beyond, the infill. Infill is extremely important, but there's more to infill in the next 20 to 30 years. And that's what this is. This is a general plan. It's a general overview, but more significantly, it's a vision. It's a vision. And I'm not, by removing these designations, I feel that I'm not doing this community and the future residents of this community and future populations that are in kindergarten and first grade now any justice. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. That, unless there's any further comments from the board, I'll open it up for public comment.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. Marty Richard from Hollister. We've had the debate. Can we have the vote now? That was humor.
I'm laughing.
Just trying to lighten it up a little bit. I think you've had the debate. I think everything needs to be said is said. I agree with Council Member Rivas. I think it is good to put your ideas down of why you picked these as study areas. There were specific criteria there, access to the roadways. Look, let's be honest here. There's an enormous amount of the county that's not even on this map. Y'all remember that other part? Okay, what is that, 90%? That's off limits. Nobody's building there, nothing. We got a whole bunch of the county in this part that's prime ag land. That's off limits. Got the hillside, that's off limits. And we got places where the topography doesn't work, that's off limits. We have places where there won't be any water, those are going to be off limits. And there's going to be a lot of places. It may be an Indian burial ground, there may be an historic place, there may be all kinds of places that are off limits. But that does not relieve you of your obligation to do planning. And that's what this is all about. If you won't do planning in the general plan, then it's not a general plan. And as I wrote in my column, and I think I sent to you because I'm never shy about telling you what I think. This general plan is not flying over the county, taking a aerial photograph, signing it and putting it in the file, and saying that's the way it is. Who's coming next with some proposal to put something somewhere? We see the result of that. You want to see that? Just go down, just go down San Benito Street, where you used to have a gas station right next to whatever it was, you know, a church or something. You know, that's the result of, oh, somebody else has a good idea. Planning is saying, these are the preferred places. These are our vision of where things should go. Doesn't mean they have to go there. Doesn't mean that's the only place they can go. It just means that you've thought about it for the community. And planned communities are whether you like them or dislike them or whatever, they are the future. And we don't have any choice about it because the cost of having a non-planned community in the amount of land it takes to house people, the amount of energy it takes to operate, and all the things that we're trying to save are just too great. Now, it may be great to put people stacked around Hollister. There's 66% of the current county lives. Do we want 85% of the current county living in one? Is that healthy in one city, essentially? I don't think so. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Marvin Jones?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members. I found an article reference to a Department of Defense training manual over the weekend. It listed undesirables. And I looked through the criteria for extremist personnel that are undesirable for the Department of Defense, and I found me. No joke. I'm an activist for personal freedom and individual liberty. Now, if DOD, NSA, IRS, whoever's recording this electronic transmission, expletive deleted. They'd be real proud of our land use element. First sentence in our land use element of our draft general plan reads, San Benito County has land use regulatory authority over all unincorporated land in the county, except what's guarded and controlled by the government. What was it, 2 months, 3 months ago, we had the dictionary down here and we came up with private economic enterprise under central government control. That's what the first sentence in your land use element says. Remember where we found that in the dictionary? Fascist. We had that Agenda 21 book down here, Chapter 15. It had the conservation and biological diversity. Had that big poster down here one time of all the land that is sequestered or to be sequestered in the United States. I gave you the copy of the California, Nevada one. All the red lands are off limits to humans. They're just another member of the food chain. The bright yellow ones are restricted use. Humans can go there, but it's very restrictive. Notice all the little red lines between the various areas? Land use element, 2.4, corridors for habitat. So we've got that in our general plan. Coordination of habitat preservation in our general plan. State of California is not to be outdone. On the back of that sheet, Assembly Bill 2780, which was passed a couple of years ago, says here's what we will sequester statewide in the state of California. It does not include the rangeland heritage because that's a federal one. It does not include some of the Corps of Engineers water projects. So we've got an awful lot in our general plan that is really restrictive. Center of biological diversity. I'll close by saying that I don't think the ink was dry on your fracking ordinance before the Center of Biological Diversity sued you.
Thank you.
Judy Johnson?
Thank you.
Good morning, supervisors. I hope you're well. You sound well,
Morning.
and I'm glad to see you. Anthony, I was a tad frightened when I agreed with much of what you said, but you're spot on, babe.
Thank you.
I'm here this morning to speak to something that I don't feel was fully addressed in the draft plan, and that is the interest of the special districts. We have more in this county. I knew at one time how many there were, but there's a whole mess of them, as you all know. And their interest and their work was not truly considered. I know my husband wrote a rather lengthy statement regarding the Sunny Slope District and the fact that things had not been considered in the draft. And that's true. But we got a response back saying, well, we ran out of money, ta-da-da-da. I really urge you to give more emphasis to those special districts. People are elected to those districts. They represent the local folk. They know what's going on, and it's very important that their views be considered. If an area is not considered, as we felt the Sunny Slope area had not been fully identified, the issues there, then that is not fair to those people who are already involved and the stakeholders therein. Thank you very much. I appreciate seeing you.
Thank you.
Jason Redderer.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Jason Rudder. I'm with L&G. It's been a long time since I appeared before you. Last time was during the Solargen, Pinoche Valley Solar Farm proceedings. I represented Solargen and the county in successfully defending those entitlements. You should have, at this point, you should have received my letter already. Wanted to emphasize a few points in response to concerns about the threat of litigation if the general plan update and the EIR continue to address and identify the new community study areas. Other counties have designated similar study areas in their general plans. This isn't a new concept for County of San Benito. Also, by designating study areas, the county is not short-circuiting CEQA or streamlining future project approvals. Applicants are still required to go through the application process, environmental review, and apply for general plan amendments. So the county and public will have an opportunity to thoroughly review and vet these future projects. It's not entitling the property, as Supervisor Barrios explained, and County Council. Regarding the potential litigation risk, the board has broad discretion to weigh and balance community interests in formulating their own development policies in the general plan. A reviewing court will not question or second-guess the board's judgment or decision on these matters. A general plan EIR is also able to analyze study areas at a general programmatic high-level amount of detail, particularly where the site-specific information and the details of a specific development project are not known. There's case law and the CEQA guidelines, which I cited in my letter, that specifically support that approach to environmental analysis. Finally, eliminating the new community study areas from the general plan update and the EIR will likely increase costs, not reduce costs. Both documents already address the new community study areas. Any new consultant would have to review all the references in the EIR and the general plan to these study areas and assess how removing those study areas would affect the analysis. That's going to require some additional time and expense. And also, deleting the study areas from the general plan and the EIR won't change the risk of litigation. You know, many of the letters criticizing the EIR include issues that are unrelated to the new community study areas. They cover a broad scope of potential issues. So I would urge the board to proceed with its thoughtful decision to include the study areas in the general plan and the EIR, which was the result of a very comprehensive community outreach effort and the result of input from a number of different stakeholders. Thank you.
Yeah, I got a question
Sure.
for you. You're representing the group that has the 10,000 home potential subdivision out there out on the Balsa, and as part of the you're in the circle, in the big one, actually. And but if that study area was, you know, perhaps it doesn't need to take into scale that it's showing right there to accommodate what your interests would like to have. That's one option, I guess. Another option would be to, if, you know, to take it out altogether. What is the impact of taking out the study areas on your effort to develop out there?
Well, just to clarify, I mean, our office, LNG, we've been in San Benito, I think, for almost 5 or 6 years, and we represent a whole host of different interests and property owners in San Benito County. And this is more of a community-wide interest as opposed to any individual developer. But in terms of the importance of the study area, it's not just for the particular study area up there, the one that you're referring to, but the other ones. I think it's important, particularly when you're dealing with other agencies in the land use context. There are transportation agencies that like to see potential areas on a map for purposes of planning future transportation infrastructure on a regional level. So it's important, at least for other agencies, to see that the county has an actual plan for future growth, and these are the areas that have been designated for purpose of the kind of more regional transportation planning purposes. So that's, I think, one of the most important reasons, not just for that study area, but for the other study areas in terms of kind of how the regional planning is going to take place for San Benito. So that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, and that's why I kind of stated that in my estimation, and whether it's a correct way to state it or not, it's kind of an entitlement to have that designation. The guy across the street doesn't have it, and he may be just as interested in developing his property and as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next speaker? No other speakers? Please step forward and.
Good morning, Board of Supervisors. My name is Wayne Norton, and I live in Aromas. And I came today with some prepared remarks, but after listening to your discussion, I think I want to reassess and maybe make a couple different remarks. So I'm sorry if this rambles a little bit. Wasn't my intention. First of all, I just want to set the record straight for Mr. Jones that the CDB lawsuit came after the ordinance was passed, but it had nothing to do with the ordinance. It was about a decision that was made that wasn't taken by the fracking ordinance. So just want to set the record straight with that. The special study areas, I think, Supervisor Patella has a point that whether they're entitlements or not, they do create winners and losers. If the county is going to funnel development into specific areas, if the county doesn't, then there's really kind of no point in special areas. If that's not where you want development, where you're encouraging development, then I don't guess I understand the point of them. I also want to remind you that these special areas also put pressure on special districts, schools, water districts. I'm an elected member of the Aromas Water District, and the Rocks Road area is in our sphere of influence, and we understand what the water issues there. So I hope in the ongoing process of dealing with this issue, or wrestling with this issue, that you bring the special districts in as partners and have some discussions with them about whether or not these are the areas that really make the most sense. I mean, all kinds of issues can be overcome. The question is this really down the road where the county wants to be and where the county wants to go? I guess that's it. That's the important stuff. But I also appreciate the point that Supervisor Rivas made about, we need to take a look at the future, and we need to make sure that we understand what's going on. And I particularly like your suggestion that we have more specificity about why these areas, as opposed to other areas in the county that could just as easily make this map as these particular areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Brad Sullivan.
Good morning, Chair and Honorable Board. Brad Sullivan. I came here about 10 years ago, and I came here after talking with Jeff Gillis. Jeff Gillis wanted to open an office in Hollister and King City, and he gave me a choice of where I wanted to live because he didn't want to be a carpetbagger. He wanted to put roots down. And then when Paul Ravella, lifetime, multi-generation Baylor, came, we've been in this office, so we believe in this area. And as many of you know, 8 years ago, I used to show up at meetings, a lot of meetings, and I kept my mouth shut. Over the years, I've found, like so many people, hey, participate, it's fun. But I've been to the GPAC meetings. I've been to the board, the planning commission. When Julie Morris put on Vision San Benito, we took 3 days off to be there. And what I heard and what I have heard from even the people who we like to classify or qualify, I mean, I get labeled a developer, but then there are the other people who are no growth. They're not, there really is no one that's no growth in this county. They just want a different kind of growth. And they want smart growth, and they want intelligent, they want flexible growth. And I think you've done that. I mean, I really applaud Byron for being able to, he's like the only person who's been in the general plan process the entire time, that you have picked it up. You have picked up the concepts of flexible growth. You have put on very exacting standards in your general plan policy, and I believe if you use Mr. Rivas' suggestion to tie those standards to the specific areas, you will have a better document. But I was reading through this, and this is not an old concept or a new concept. In your 1980 general plan, you had rural urban, 20 units per acre in your rural urban, in your zoning. And in 1992, you added area of special studies. So you've had these concepts around. And as Jason and other speakers have said, they are the wave of the future. Also, a misunderstanding we're hearing today is that it's kind of a new community study areas or city. You chose, the GPAC did, the Planning Commission, and you chose to use alternative B, which was cities, spheres of influence, which includes Sunny Slope, Tres Pinos, some of the Aromas Water District within their sphere of influence, and new community study areas. Now, I saw in your documents this blow up, and this is the only time you're going to see this. I'm not going to bring this to meetings time after it gets dog-eared. You have these light areas where they put overlays on to find the constraints. Could I just point out the similarity between these overlays, the white areas? You guys did the work. And those are the areas that have the less or the least amount of constraints. And you did the work, your consultants did the work, GPAC met dozens of times dealing with this. They may not have appreciated what they were doing, but the new community study areas are those areas with the least.
Thanks.
If you have any questions, or I'll leave this, or I'll throw it away, but you'll never see it again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, good morning. The alternative B you're talking about at our committee public meeting on January 2011 did not have that former DMB site special study area. And so then the board decided to make changes to that preferred, that we, the majority of us, chose as being more reasonable. And they asked that the changes be a little bit more flexible, and also that we put in the former DMB site. So that is what you see there. Now, to me, that is not infill. That's not using the service areas of the fringe cities that we have. And WISE development is concentrating among the cities, around the cities, and leaving the open space ag land available to keep our environment healthy, following the state environment laws. So you're talking about the cattlemen being the problem for air pollution. I think the excess you've put in for the special study area, especially way out, I mean from our west boundary all the way up to Hollister. And, you know, you've put excess commercial areas and special study areas. That's where the pollution is coming from. We need our cattlemen. We need the agriculture. And we need the open space that is working sustainably. So I wish you would take the blame off that and stop confusing us. And also, as far as saying that this is vision, we've got this whole preferred plan that has been broken up into page by page and confusing in the general plan, where in 2011, at the GPAC meeting, it was handed out in the sides, and that's what decisions were made from. So it's not just this for development. There is so much development, and you can get this from the planning department, perhaps. Okay, so be aware. You're just looking at part of that now. Look at all those sections of
Please
proposed
address the
development.
board as you speak. Thank you.
Pardon me, I'm so sorry.
right.
Also, could you please put more detail? The Yuba City General Plan has every one of their land use with acreage and percentage of the total county. Now, my gosh, that's transparency. We know what's happening in that county as you look on the website. So why aren't you being more detailed and transparent, having acreage for every land use and percentage? That's a good base analysis for general plan. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mr. Patelli, for what you've been saying today.
Thank you.
Reasonable.
Right, Shaw-Coram, Mary Shaw-Coram from Aromas. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. I live in Aromas, not far from this study area, the Rocks Road area, and I wanted to just express some concerns. Having lived there for 27 years, I'm aware that water is in short supply. In fact, a number of surrounding areas, Oak Ridge, which is just across on the Monterey side, has many dry wells, and they've had to go to Aromas Water District asking for water. So I think Wayne knows that quite well. Chateau Drive, near the where the eucalyptus trees are, Cannon Road, their wells have gone dry, so Aromas Water District extended water there. Ballantree, also in Monterey, North Monterey County, by the Red Barn, their wells have gone dry. I know people who've lived there. They've also gotten water for Aromas Water District. So we basically, and I should also mention the Rancholaria development, which San Juan Bautista, I think, did not support, but somehow they got water from Aromas again. So I think that aquifer is really stressed. Those of us who live in Aromas, who have wells near the Aromas water wells, are quite concerned that our own wells will eventually go dry, especially given climate change. And I'm a believer in climate change. I think that's going to be a reality. So I really think it's very irresponsible to designate that area around Rocks Road as a area for future development, because water is really not available right now. And Supervisor Patel has mentioned already, which I appreciate, but I just want to stress that I have been living there and I've been seeing so many wells go dry all around me, and I'm afraid that my own well will at some point in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is Paul Ravella. I am a partner at the firm of L&G, but that should not discount the fact that I'm also a lifelong resident of the city of Hollister, along with each of my extended family members, except for one aunt who has mysteriously found her way to Panama. You know, I'm here today because, you know, there's been a lot of questions about these new community study areas being in the interests and the benefit of developers. You know, dating back to 2004, at that time, 69% of the county of San Benito expressed support for well-planned growth that will provide much-needed benefits to the county. Now, since that time, you've had a number of efforts, including a county-wide survey with in excess of 400 responses. You've had a 19-meeting General Plan Advisory Committee process. You've had at least 4 community workshops put on by the General Plan Update and EIR consultant. You've had numerous public hearings, including a special meeting, joint meeting between the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. There's been a number of opportunities for this board to consider the interests of the public, and I think it's safe for me to say that the majority of the public wants, the majority of the community wants well-planned growth that will provide infrastructure improvements, preservation of farmland, prime farmland, you know, those sorts of considerations. And I think it's probably safe for me to say that each member of this board at one time or another has gone on the record as wanting to express to the world that we are open for, I think open for business might even have been the phrase that's been most oftenly cited. The only thing I'm here to do today is to ask that this board just make its policy consistent with what the community wants, upwards of 69%, what each member of this board has expressed an interest in, what the hardworking folks of the General Plan Advisory Committee have stated, you know, and the new community study areas is one way of doing that without opening the door to uninhibited sprawl. I thank you for the opportunity to address you here today, and thank you for the work.
That's it? Anyone else? Mr. Lowe?
Good morning. This has been a lot to take in. The county's new general plan will send the message of how we as a community plan to grow, what is important to us, and what we want to be known for. It is imperative that we recognize and zone lands for economic development. We must work with consultants to ensure the message is sent that San Benito County is open for business. Land that can be hooked up to city services and has highway access must be considered for industrial zoning. If we want a community with better jobs to housing ratio, we must address this in our general plan. If we are going to spend money on additional environmental work, let's do it wisely on what everybody continues to say is the most important thing, jobs for San Benito County. The special study areas we're talking about today have additional environmental work that will need to be considered. When a developer looks at this plan and sees these areas, they will assume services are available and that there is where the community wants to see housing. Making a statement that there is no guarantee that housing will be provided is not enough. Why include these areas? Why give a developer a false impression? If you decide to include these areas, what additional environmental work will be done? We must ask ourselves the hard question. Do we want to continue as a bedroom community, or do we want to change directions and do the hard work it will take to bring jobs to this community? This morning, I think sitting here as a community member and listening to the discussion, we continually put the focus on jobs. That's the most important thing. But we've spent over an hour talking about housing. Why don't we have one of these meetings talking about jobs and economic development and industrial zoning and how we can get the most for our money by bringing industrial zoning and bringing a campus-type environment? It's just something different. It's the same comments over and over, and it's always about housing. We need these meetings to focus on where we want to go. And I've heard many times in this room about don't be afraid of a lawsuit when you make this decision. I think just the opposite is true. This board is wise enough not to include these special study areas that do nothing but call for more environmental scrutiny. If housing is to be encouraged, it should be in areas that have services in place. The board adopted a resolution when the city passed the bonds for the new sewer plant. One more second, okay? The strategy at that time was to encourage development where they can the development can be hooked up to city services to save our natural resources. I believe that's extremely important, and I believe bringing jobs to San Benito County has got to be our focus with this plan, not more houses. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I guess I'll close the public comment period and thank all those that participated. And we also have a little bit more on our agenda that you could participate again anyway. I'll bring it back to the board for further discussion and direction on the specialist new community study areas. Supervisor Munzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Byron? I'd like to address the Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Norton's comments about the special districts. Will not the special districts be included as a project proceeds or unfolds?
Yes.
They would have to be, if it's in their sphere of influence or in their district, they would have to be.
If we get an application for a specific project and it's within their area, then they will be, their comments will be solicited.
Yeah, okay, so our process now has no intention of excluding them or leaving them out.
No.
It's just, this is, because there is no project assigned or with most of these study areas, that's why they have not specifically been included at this point.
I believe we attempted to include as much as possible. We're hearing that they could use some more. Well, we will absolutely relook at it. So I wouldn't want to say that we've excluded them at all. But if it was a specific project, then they would be notified and they would have the opportunity to condition the project.
Okay. The other thing I'd like to point out that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but under our current general plan, there was a project and a special study area south of the area that we are looking at, much beyond services, and that project has since died. So I guess what my point is, even with these study areas, we are trying to focus any future growth in the northern part of the county. As I think Marty mentioned, there's 90% of the county is not in this area, and basically we as a board are saying we want growth in the area where the transportation is and where services are closer and can support growth, and then it becomes the burden of the applicant to prove that water, roads, everything they need will be there for their project.
We can't guarantee at this time that everything will be there for their project.
No, but it's a burden of the applicant to prove that. So we as a board with this map, we're saying we want growth in the northern part of the county where the lion's share of the services already exists. And I guess I differ with one of our last speakers in that, yes, we need jobs. We need good jobs, but the manufacturers and commercial interests that supply those jobs are also looking for bodies to fill those job positions. And they want to see enough rooftops to sustain their jobs needs. And unfortunately, I don't think we are there at a county, as a county, from what I've heard, that, we just don't have enough rooftops at this time to bring in large commercial interests or even large manufacturing interests. Yes, they definitely need to be part of this discussion, but unfortunately or fortunately, to get there, we need more rooftops. And we need to plan, as Supervisor Rivas said, we need to plan intelligently where those houses are going to go, where those communities are going to go, whatever we want to define them. I feel that the growth needs to be in the northern part of the county. I do not feel it needs to be entirely in all of our unincorporated areas, because the county as a entity needs to grow also. We need to have a larger tax base so that we can provide the services that we are not able to provide right now. We need to have a bigger tax base so that we can have more deputy sheriffs, so that we can have a North County fire station, a South County fire station, improve the fire station in San Juan to help them improve their fire services. That can only come from a tax base. And the tax base not only comes from houses, but it comes from businesses, and it comes from the ability of those workers in those businesses to spend their money in this county. Because if we had more jobs now, they have no place to spend their money here. They still will be going to Gilroy or Salinas or Capitola to spend their money. So we need all three elements: the manufacturing jobs, the commercial jobs, and the housing market to become a sustainable community. Because I think at this point, we are not a sustainable community. Just drive down Main Street, look at the empty buildings. Mine is one of them. You know, we need bodies here that have some place to spend their money, and then we start building a tax base that we can support ourselves and sustain ourselves. Whether we need circles on a map to do that, or again, as Supervisor Rivas said, we just need wording in the policy document to say we are open for business, we want to grow, and we want to grow in the northern part of the county where services are, is my position, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Chair?
Supervisor Barrios?
Yeah, thank you. Byron, on your report under the new community study area, you make a comment which I wholeheartedly agree with, that it is unknown what the impact of removing this section from the general plan will have on the general plan update. But removal of this section may have a domino effect on the rest of the document and the DEIR, resulting in more time and increased cost. And it should be noted that the DEIR identifies mitigation measures needed, but those mitigations do not necessarily need to be implemented by the county. I think this is a really critical part of the report that you gave us. I feel very strongly about getting our general plan done, and the sooner the better, because time will definitely, and we know this because we've already experienced it, will definitely be more money, and money we don't have. And I believe we have a GP that has evolved from the community, a lot of community input, diversity, flexibility, and each district that we represent was represented at GPAC by design. We all went out and did outreach and made sure that we had somebody from our district representing and having a voice and giving us input on the GPAC. So I just want to say that I want to move forward, and that I want to see that I want to keep the new community study areas with some language that will identify the reasons why those were chosen, and I want to release the RFP. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I as well want to just move forward. I think that it's, as I spoke to nearly an hour and 10 minutes ago, I think it's important moving forward with these new study areas that we have a narrative for each study area, that one has a brief description of the existing, the conditions of that area, acreage, just some historical information, some background info that explains why the area is a special study area. And if we can, Byron, any info related to city and county coordination and managing the future of those areas would be, I think, extremely important. Like we had the discussion about special districts and whatnot. I think that warrants some type of discussion. So if that is included in moving forward, then I'm okay with it. Sure.
Just I guess I'm going to steal some comments from some of the members of the public and Supervisor Munzer. I lived all my life here in San Bernardino County, and I've seen our community grow in many different ways, and I've seen that the funds or the resources needed to sustain our old, Hollister is in need of help. And it saddens me to see 5th Street, 4th Street, West Street, Monterey Street, a lot of communities needing those repairs, and I don't want to see that. Maybe this general plan that we're moving forward is going to help alleviate some of that assistance that we need so desperately. And we have to fix those two. We can't not discard the situation the way we are in our community. And if it's going to create tax dollars, allow us to hire deputies, allow us to improve our community, our quality of life, let's move forward with it. Let's get a plan in place. We are in a very historical moment in San Bernardino County. If we continue to delay and delay, we're going to miss the boat. And so we've got to move forward. Supervisor Rivas was correct. He was on dot. And I, too, support the concept with language added to it. So let's move forward, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. It sounds like that's pretty much the direction, is to maintain the community special study areas with developing a higher level of description as far as the justification why they're in there. I'm going to be on record being against it. I think that you can't justify it to the effects that would support those areas. I see areas that should be considered as growth areas for the county that are not on that map. Does that preclude that they cannot submit an application and grow? Or do you have to be in the special study area to do just that? It almost sounds like you have to be in those special study areas. And it leads to a scary fact. When I wake up in the morning and I want to be a good supervisor, and a task at hand is this general plan, how can I best serve the citizens of San Benito County? How can I do that? It's not about making a brighter day for a developer so he can make a buck. I expect him to do his job and submit, a project that is a benefit to the county as a whole. What I see here is that's not what's happening. The area in the center of the map, that's the entire length from City of Hollister to our county line. Thousands and thousands and thousands of houses could be applied and developed through that corridor. Some of that's prime farmland, if I'm not mistaken. Is that what we really, really want? Apparently so by this board. And, I rather have gone with descriptions that define an area very specifically, as we have had done in the past, than blobs of area on a map that covers hundreds and hundreds of acres, or maybe even thousands. And it's just ill-conceived, and I'm not going to support it. I won't vote for the general plan if it contains this type of designations, but I respect the decision made by my colleagues on the board, and that's just how it goes. So, and that's not to say I'm against growth. I'm for growth, but I'm for smart, well-planned growth that provides a benefit to this community, and I don't see it here. Thanks. So the direction is go ahead and keep the community study areas. And how does the board want to have that come back to as far as the descriptions and justification?
I think that's up to Byron on how. I would imagine it would be worked out with a new consultant that comes on board, and then we'll get a draft version of it of the specific narratives.
Yeah, it's something that we would probably have the new consultant look at. Also, though, I mean, staff can start on it and provide some of the groundwork, because we know why, we know the benefits and drawbacks to each of these spots and why they were chosen.
I think we probably need to make a motion, but before we go there, I just want to say that I want to leave our community with this thought that even though these new communities, and we agreed to leave them in there, are included in the 2035 general plan, as Byron has stated here, every future proposal is a stand-alone project that will need to be evaluated by the county on a case-by-case basis. And we cannot forget that agriculture is one of the things that we have promised to protect. And that will be in our general plan language. So the community needs to know that we're not going into this with a thought that we're just going to put houses everywhere. We're going to protect our community, and we value the agricultural land that we so need to keep that industry healthy. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Byron, have we excluded any of the areas? I know Brad brought up his map that was developed during the GPAC committee, where they kept overlaying areas that was not conducive to a build out for one reason or another. And, you know, these four circles are kind of what was not excluded from that map. But have we made it difficult for a developer to come into another part of the county and submit a project by having these circles?
By having these circles, the intent was not to discourage potential development other places. There might be more constrained. There might be more hurdles in other areas. Due to high slopes, or due to landslides, or due to lack of water, or due to endangered species, or due to Williamson Act contracts. But that's would be on the developer to work his way through. But we did not exclude any place in the county specifically exclude any place in the county from development. However, there are protections in place for prime farmland, for instance.
And have we given anybody, a developer inside the circle, a leg up on his?
As was stated before, you would not be able to use the general plan to say this area is unplanned growth, because we're identifying it as a potential for growth.
So it kind of does give them a leg up.
It doesn't stop them from going through the process, but it is a little more beneficial. But it's not, as we talked about entitlements earlier, I wouldn't consider it an entitlement.
Right.
I will go ahead and make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we direct staff to keep the new community study areas when moving forward with a general plan update, and give direction to release an RFP to complete the update. And with adding the language, the narrative that Supervisor Rivas referred to as to the whys, the transportation, access, the protecting agriculture, all those that are stated here in our report that you gave us.
Supervisor Barrios,
yes.
Why don't you start over again for benefit of Supervisor Rivas from the start, please?
My motion is to direct staff to keep the new community study areas when moving forward with the general plan update, to give direction to release an RFP to complete the update, and to include language that will identify the whys of why these new community study areas, to include transportation reasons, protecting our resources, protecting ag land, and all those that are listed in the report that Byron has given us.
Okay.
That's my motion.
I have a question. I don't know if it needs to be to the maker of the motion or the chair, but part of her motion is actually a agenda item where it was agendized that we would discuss the RFP as opposed to RFQ.
I made the motion to release an RFP. that was included in my motion.
Yeah, so you're,
On stone.
I'll second the motion under consideration, Mr. Chair, and ask the maker of the motion a question.
okay, go ahead, Supervisor De La Cruz.
Thank you. I would encourage my fellow supervisor to divide the question. The reason why is to, one, vote on it, two, the other one, delay it, because that is one of the items that we're going to talk about, and we definitely need the public input on that perspective. It's just a consideration for your
Yeah.
motion.
I would be happy to change my motion to separate them.
Okay.
So I will then just make the motion to include directing staff to keep the new community study area when moving forward with a general plan update, and to include the narratives that I mentioned earlier.
And as I stated, I will support as a second.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, being a chair, is to go ahead and move forward with the community study areas, but we're still to discuss other related topics of general plan, and also we're also discuss the our RFQ and talk about that. It's just separate. What we're doing is just voting on the community study areas.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's what I have. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? One oppose. Myself. And we'll take a short 10-minute break before we move on to number 2. get started again. Okay. Byron, you have anything on to present on the on number 2?
Well, it was discussed in the past, the discussion whether, mandatory versus optional general plan elements. And, I wanted to bring forward, these are what's mandatory, what's optional, how it's set up, and, there was a comment once that, why don't we only do what's required and not do anything further? And I think from a staff point of view, the optional elements are necessary. The economic development element is necessary for this plan. And I tried to explain before that the greenhouse gas analysis is also necessary, even regardless of how we label it and if it's an element or not. So, I guess affirmation from this board to move forward with the elements elements as they are already listed in the draft general plan. And then if there's any discussion about land use designations in specific areas, or if you wanted to revise the land use diagram to include additional industrial, additional expansion of the sphere of influence in Tres Pinos, and any other commercial or industrial nodes is what we were calling them, the little dots on the map.
Any comments or questions or direction?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Byron, the whole wine overlay, commercial overlay, that is under the environmental development portion of...
Yeah, economic development.
Economic,
What did I say?
environmental.
I'm sorry. Yes, economic development element. That is a justification for the wine hospitality overlay, correct?
And we did get requests to expand it a little further.
Right.
And I, we spoke to him after the meeting, and that the request makes sense to include that area.
So if we...
Not an issue.
But the economic development element is optional, but if we threw that out, then we would either be throwing out the wine overlay, or we'd have to put it
Apply it
someplace else.
someplace else, yeah.
Okay. Because, Mr. Chair, for myself, looking over the economic development element, I pretty much go along with everything it said, and I think it's things that we need to do, we're trying to do, and I don't think we need to throw it out just because it's an option as opposed to a mandatory element.
Okay, good. Any other comments from board members?
Well, and I apologize, Supervisor Munzer. I know there was discussion in the community about out in the Tres Pinos area, everything's taken care of?
Well, no. There was a request to expand the area, make it a higher density area within the water district sphere. So that is not reflected in the current land use plan. It was a request from a property owner. At the GPAC level, we tried not to apply too much specific properties, changes to specific properties, but it was anticipated that those requests would all go to the Planning Commission. And the Planning Commission could then make changes, and which is typically how this happens. At the Planning Commission, you'll have members of the public coming in with specific locations and saying, I think this should be higher, more density, I think this should be commercial, and the Planning Commission making that decision. So the question is, when do you want us to include it now, or do you want us to wait until the Planning Commission sees this document at a public hearing? Or do you want to include it as part of the analysis that a new consultant is going to look at?
I think for planning, Byron, Ms. Chair, if I could, for planning, I would like to see it included, just so that if we decide not to put it in there, we can remove it. But if I want to make sure that we get a complete package from the consultant, whoever, gives us a quote, so to speak. So I would rather include it myself, just to make sure we're not leaving anything out.
Yeah. So you're saying have the review with the Planning Commission as well as some of the public hearings?
No, to include it prior to going to the Planning Commission. Make that as part of the cost that is going to be, or part of the scope of work that is going to be required of the consultant. Because if you do it now, then we know how much money it's going to cost us. We don't want surprises later that we decide, okay, let's include it later, and now we have an additional cost.
Okay.
It may be easier to do it up front rather than on the backside.
Okay. Any other comments?
If I might add to that, I think a lot of the reason why the changes were perceived to be discouraged is because we didn't want to have to recirculate the environmental document. And when we changed the plan, it would likely constitute recirculation of the document.
Oh.
Now, since because of the actions that have been taken, recirculation is likely. I think that recirculation of the environmental document is likely. I think that then opens us up to allow us to reconsider some things that weren't considered. So I think that's consistent with what your direction is also.
Now, I guess I have a follow-up question. Why is recirculation likely if we didn't really, what did we change that may cause that to happen?
Well, what we are likely going to change is some of the mitigation measures and the flexibility in the language, because when we increase the flexibility, then it's no longer a required mitigation. So, I really need the consultant here to help explain that portion of it. But from speaking to other consultants, they felt that recirculation was a likely conclusion to this process. But I really won't know that until we have someone on board.
Right. And that just kind of proves why we went the direction that we did with the changing of consultants, because that flexibility should have been included from the get-go, and we would not have to recirculate. But it didn't happen. So here we are.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair, Byron, you're talking about all the decisions that we made as of 2 minutes ago not require a recirculation?
No,
So
that does.
If we move forward right now, we're good.
Not necessarily. We got to respond to the comments that we got.
Understanding, notwithstanding the comments.
And those comments might result, and our response to those comments might result in recirculation of the document.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm
Jerry?
kind of lost. Are we discussing the mandatory and the optional elements of the general plan now, or are we talking about a specific area and its density destination, land use, in other words, land use destination? I'm sorry, it's on, I'm sitting too far from it. I'm sorry, are we talking about just whether we're going to include the optional elements of the general plan as opposed to just having the mandatory elements, or are we talking about a specific land use designation right now?
We're talking about both.
Lost in the discussion.
Yeah.
Both.
Okay, all right.
Well, what kind of direction do you need, Byron, for this particular item?
Well, if the board is in agreement with what Supervisor Barrios said, what we're going to do as part of the RFP or RFQ, or work with the consultant, is to amend this land use diagram to include, to expand the Tres Pinos and Aromas, to relook at Tres Pinos and Aromas, let's put it that way. And with regard to some of the land use requests we've gotten in the past. I guess the question I have is how, and I don't know if we can answer this today, but we have requests from the public that they want specific property to be considered as a different, different zone or different general plan designation, higher density, commercial, industrial. How do we address those requests? Because we have not addressed them yet.
Well, that's kind of what I was bringing out in the first item as far as new community study areas. Now, did we just eliminate potential growth where maybe we should be looking at it? And Supervisor Munzer, you may have to clarify it for me as far as down in Tres Pinas. You stated that you wanted to see the growth in far to the north in our county, and does that mean that you don't want anything along Airline Highway and in that direction? And does that preclude those folks from putting in an application unless we put in another community study area? And that's what it sounds like staff is
These requests
suggesting that we may need to do.
These requests are far more specific, I think. I mean, the new community study areas we tried to keep them general, tried to keep them flexible. What I have is requests to change a specific parcel number from A to B. And how do we address that? We were going to address it at the Planning Commission, but at the last meeting of the board here, when we talked about the general plan, we had a couple of different residents come up and make specific requests about property. So I want to know how you want me to address those, include those two as part of our future general plan, or to wait until we get to the Planning Commission and have it come in as a request then.
The only thing what I was concerned about was cost. To wait, see, when you go out when you put out that RFP, you want to be really as detailed in the scope of work that you can, right? So that we know what our costs are up front. So if we don't do that at the beginning, then we may have to end up paying the consultant additional funds if we decide to include those specific areas. And I believe it was Aromas, Tres Pinos, and wasn't there one in North County as well?
Those are the two I remember, but the wine, yes, that was the wine overlay.
But
expanded.
I thought there was another industrial area that that somebody was interested in. But that's besides the point.
You know,
Those came in when the DEIR went out, right? Those were some of the comments.
And we've had them actually prior to that as well.
They
but
came
just
prior to
weren't
that. So
acted on.
now, do we want to include them now or wait and in the scope of work? Or do we want to take it to the Planning Commission and decide after the consultant has been hired?
You know, what I see is that in my ideal world, if it was up to me, I'd have this on the Planning Commission every single meeting, planning a general plan until it's done. Consultant shows up. They take public hearing input. They have a specific, okay, are we address additional industrial areas that, you know, we have a basis of our general plan. Well, we left out one area, say out there in Aromas along the rail line. If we want to include that, make a determination, put the language in the zoning, and we're done with that at this meeting, and the consultant incorporates it in a general plan. If we're going to consider another specific planned community area next meeting, talk about it, have the public hearing, and incorporate it. I don't know if you could do, we need to get done with this general plan.
Yeah.
And we let Mittner and Harnish get away with murder. They put interns on it, and they drug it out so they could get more money. They got it, and but we have a foundation that we need to finish, whether for the specific plant areas or not, it's besides the point. But we have to attack this with enough public input through the commission, I think, that could dedicate the time, and the timelines are establish and issue by issue by issue until it's done. And I think that's the quickest way we could approach it. I almost don't even think we could get a price out of a consultant because nobody knows what type of work is left to do.
Well, I think Byron has more specific direction now.
We'll be able to refine the RFP after today to include what we're talking about. As far as today's agenda, obviously the new community study area was the biggest one, but I tried to include I tried to respond, have a place to respond to everyone who came up and commented. That's why I've got the Aromas and Tres Pinos on the agenda here.
Mr. Chair, may I point something out? I kind of have I based my decisions on what the general the GPAC had recommended and what we had all agreed to. And they chose to not identify these specific locations and wanted it to go to the Planning Commission instead. That was their direction. Is that correct, Byron?
That's how we understood it, that they didn't want to create the winners and losers that we were
Exactly. So what if we decide to go out to the consultant, let them know that this may be coming so they can put up cost to that separate and still let the Planning Commission move forward with deciding on whether these should be included or not. Then this way we've respected the direction that the GPAC has given us and also know how much it's going to cost us up front.
We can include that as an option.
As an option. That would be my recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other comments?
No, that's good.
Why don't I open it up for public comment, and do we have any speakers? Oh, okay.
I think it's good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Jeff Gillis. As many of you know, I have a law firm in downtown Hollister, and one of my partners, 2005 or 6 when we started, is actually 2003, so we've been here for a little while, but also I've been practicing since 1979, so I have a few more gray hairs and a little less hair on the top of my head as a result of 34 years of practice. The RFP process. As a consultant, lawyer, I think that, the RFQ process, you end up spending $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to get something that the RFP process will basically try to get without paying for it. So, you may not get exactly what you want through the RFP process, but you're going to get to weed out quite a few people. You get to see who's serious and who's not serious, and you can always come back to the RFQ process if you think that the results of your RFP process have not generated worthwhile, bids. So that's number one. 2, from a standpoint of organizing the process, I think we have to live in the present. We have to look at where we are today, and the consultant that you end up picking looks at where we are right now. Then he asks the question, or Byron will ask the question, where we are, does that trigger research? Yes or no? He's going to come back to you and say, where we are today might trigger research. These are the reasons. Then you're going to look at different requests. And these requests will come all the way through this process, through the Planning Commission and through the Board of Supervisors, and the consultant along the way is going to be advising you. Yes, these are great requests, good policy. It will trigger recirculation or it will not trigger recirculation. You will have that question posed to you all the way along, and then you're going to have to make a policy decision and a cost decision. So Byron can break it up. He can break it up and say, give me a bid based on the present. Then as we go forward, based on these changes, let me know. Is this recirc or not recirc? So that process can be defined in his proposal or when he scopes it out. And the consultant can feel comfortable with the fact that he's going to have to report to you and advise you whether something's going to trigger a recirc or not. And like I said, you're going to make a decision. Good policy, bad policy, is it worth it to us? Should it be decided later on? Should we forget about it? You'll have all those, questions that are posed to you, and you'll have to think about it. So again, I think the RFP process is the right way to go, at least initially. And you can always come back, and if you're not satisfied with what you get, you can then, follow an RFQ process. And that way, I think you save $15,000, $20,000 in the process. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jim West. I'm with Granite Rock. I want to say a couple of things. I was the vice chair of the GPAC committee, and we met for a long time. So none of the things with Aromas or Trace Penis are new. They suggested that we let the Planning Commission do it, and that's fine. That's fine. I would like to have it all in now, because what happens is if we put heavy industrial, M2, both sides of Quarry Road from Granite Rock's gate to the county line, that's also both sides of the Southern Union Pacific Railroad. We can rail stuff out of there. I don't know if you're familiar with Granite Rock. We rail 40% of our rock out of that quarry up to San Francisco, San Jose, and that. And that would have an impact on our, if that's designated, goes through the EIR, it'll have an impact on our greenhouse gas reduction efforts, because that does, I mean, they're going to be industrial in here somewhere. If you put it on the rail, you have a chance to run it on the rail, which saves a lot of greenhouse gases. The other thing I want to say is the other reason I'd like you to support this to this meeting is because the general plan is a statement to people. You know, and we talk a lot about housing. You don't have to encourage housing. You have to go after commercial industrial. When we started this thing on a GPAC, we talked about one of our goals, and our goal was a balanced community. And what we found out, and apologize to Supervisor Munzer, is that this community is not balanced. We have much more houses than jobs. And we need jobs. We need a lot of jobs. So that's why the onus is on us to attract jobs. And having this board say, I want industrial out there, and it's a reasonable thing because it's on the railroad line. We can haul that way. We can save the greenhouse gases. Granite Rock owns 15 or 20% of that frontage along that road. So I have a vested interest. But that means 80% of it we do not own. We do not control. That would be my request, that you put M2, heavy industrial, both sides of the Union Pacific Rail and Quarry Road from Granite Rock's main gate, which is M2, out to the county line at Rogie Lane and Carpinteria. Is there any questions on that?
I have a question.
Supervisor Barrios.
Is that the request from the Aromas that Byron was talking about?
Yes, that is, yes. And that's been ever there since GPAC meetings and all, so.
Okay, and so what you're saying, to clarify, Jim, is that you'd like for us to do that before it goes to the Planning Commission?
Because if it will then be in the EIR, and it also sells a statement that's what the county's looking for. You know, we can't attract anyone to develop there because the consensus is that San Benito County is not friendly to business, and you can't get the zoning.
Now, why was that the recommendation from GPAC? Because it sounds pretty important, but it doesn't sound like they wanted to do it at that level.
Well,
I mean, I wanted to respect their recommendation and go to the Planning Commission, but know what it was going to cost us up front. But can you answer that?
Yes, it was. Gary Armstrong said it shouldn't be there because it came from me, and he said, you have a vested right. I said, we only control 15%. And the other thing is, I could have made the same case going to 2 meetings, not sitting through a year and a half of GPAC meetings. As I told Supervisor Botello, that I was kind of highly offended that they would say that. I mean, does anybody not know what I do?
Yeah. So you were transparent. Okay. Well, you answered my question as to why it was decided at that. So it was a recommendation from staff.
Yeah, Gary Armstrong said it shouldn't come with, because you were on the GPAC.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Franz Schneider. I was also in the GPAC, and with all due respect to my good friend, Mr. West, we did decide, as you commented, that we did not want to deal with specific parcels of property at that level. If I'm not mistaken, what you are considering here is the first time in this entire process that anybody has started to consider a specific parcel of property. And I want you to think very carefully about whether you want to do that with this piece of property and not with any other piece of property in the county at this point.
Good morning. I was also guilty of being on the GPAC and submitting a recommendation that was also discouraged because of who had made the recommendation. I was under the understanding that because I had also submitted a letter to planning at the same time, concurrently with GPAC, and I agree, we didn't want to be guilty of looking at specific properties. That was something we felt that should have been done at a later time or through the planning process. It was my understanding that by simultaneously sending a letter stating that we should be looking at Tres Pinos and expanding the urban limits, that this would be done through the process. So it wasn't intended to cost the county more in the long run looking at it, but as a matter of good planning, that it be something that be considered as the process went along.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning again, Marty Richard from Hollister. I hope you just hold that thought on the properties for a minute, because I'd like to back up to an earlier item on this agenda item, which is the mandatory versus the.
Do we have to back up to an earlier
Yeah, you
item
have to,
on
because
this?
you put it all together, and I.
Okay, let's
I don't
put
have
it all
any choice.
together. Let's say it
No,
that
you
way.
did,
That's
so
great.
I have to back up to that. It says right there, mandatory versus operational. You kind of went by it. Look, I understand you have a problem. You have a scheduling problem. You got a money problem with general plan. But it still requires that we do it right. So I support the recommendation of the planning department that we put in the optional portions we think we need. I mean, that's what they're there for, so we can decide if we need them. And certainly, one of the ones we need the most is the economic one. I don't think we're going to get an argument from anybody that is our Achilles heel. In a way, the good news is that San Bernardino County, the county, spends the least per capita on running the county, about $431 per citizen, than almost any county in California. That is the good news. So you are running a very, very, very low-cost operation. But you know, the bad news is we're only spending that much because that's all we got, okay? So, and we do not control our costs. You've heard me sing this song. I have the words. I'm having somebody do the music to it separately. We do not control much of our costs, an enormous amount of our costs. It's dictated by the state and federal government, by the rules and regulations that we don't control. And so, therefore, we have to find a way to generate a more income, and the economic portion is the most direct route. It's not the only route, and I agree with Supervisor Munzer's earlier statements on that, but it is the most direct route of doing it, and so therefore it is critical to the general plan. Not everybody's general plan is going to need a big economic portion. If I was Santa Clara, I would leave it off because everybody knows the economics. But if you're San Benito County, I think that portion of the plan will send a message to the very few people who are willing to consider moving. I wish there was a lot of them, but there's not. And so, therefore, you're in a contest with the guy down the street and the Kern County and some other county. We're in the contest, and I think we need to send the message. So we do need the optional portion, for instance, the economic portion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Joe Zanger. Sorry I couldn't be here at 9 o'clock and had a conflict. I don't know if anyone's discussed the wine and hospitality area at all this morning. You have? So is it redundant for me to speak on it, or?
Speak on it, yeah, please
Okay.
do, Joe.
I brought the cutout out of the binder for the general plan amendment. And here's one more, Kiss. So it's easy. I filed formal comments by the May deadline, and then in July, I think it was here. I was here in July. You had agendized a general plan amendment, and I spoke briefly on it. So I think just looking at this map, the hatch line, that that broad area starting with to the northwest where San Juan Bautista is, and then it goes over San Juan Canyon and through the Harris Ranch Motor Park, and then it catches Cienega Road and Piscinas and all that area to the south, and then it works its way up someplace in the Fairview Road Valley there up to, I don't know if that's Mansfield Road or Santa Ana Valley Road. I'm not sure where the lines exactly are. As you see, it's a very general map, not a whole lot of landmarks. It's very large scale. I think inadvertently, the area to the very north that I marked in, where we do have a American viticultural area since 1984, that was left out, and there's probably about 600 acres of vineyards there. So it's established. Our bonded winery is there. Leal has a duplicate tasting room there now. I think that was inadvertently left out. Things happen. So I'm asking that it be added now versus, the tedious process of a general plan amendment in the future should someone in that area want to do more than what's allowed in the future. I mean, that's a big process, general plan amendment. So now's the time to do it. I don't think the EIR that was done for the general plan, you say, well, it only contemplated the area in the hatch line. Well, if you look at it, it's got everything. It's got forest, it's got steep ridges, it's got rivers and streams, and it's got all, I'm sure, different species and plants that had to be considered, and roads and proximity to services, very obsolete areas on dirt roads. Just about everything's within that area as far as an EIR would consider. So I've got to believe the little area to the north that I'm proposing we add now was also contemplated under the general studies that they did for the EIR for the general plan amendment. That's all I got.
Okay. Thanks, Joe.
And Mr. Chair, if I could just have Byron come up, because I believe we discussed this in that this area that Mr. Zanger is referring to will be requested to be put on on the scope of work by the new consultant.
Yeah, it's not an issue to include it as part of the area. It probably should have been in the first place.
Okay. So.
Yeah, and this is a further demonstration that these lines really mean something to landowners and how we map it. And in this particular case, Mr. Zanger and other growers have already vineyards planted.
Yeah.
It makes sense, but as we look at other land uses, that's kind of what my emphasis has been all day long, as far as the importance of the lines and where they cover and why they cover it. So, great, thanks. Any other speakers?
Mr. Chair, I just have a question of Byron. The map that Mr. Zanger gave us just kind of shows a little horseshoe-shaped area in the north part of the county, his area, and then the wine overlay comes up, kind of up Fairview Road and then stops. Is it our intention to have a disconnected area, or do we want to run the overlay up Fairview Road and out 156?
Well, it was, I believe we stopped it there because that was about the extent of what, we were looking at Leal and Guerra, and that's I think that's the area where we stopped, because then it turns into more residential in nature and rural, and then row crops as opposed to vineyard. But I don't think it would be, I think we can relook at the whole shape, because personally, I don't think that a lot of this area down south necessarily needs to be part of it. I think it'd be more defined. What it looks like is we just said, okay, we were very general. I think we could focus it a little more without impact to the general plan.
Okay, all right, very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks. Any other comments or questions for Byron? Any more comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for additional discussion or, at this point, even direction.
I will make a motion, Mr. Chair, that we include the optional general plan elements, which would be the economic development primarily, public facilities, and administration. And you didn't mention the other two, Byron. You did mention economic development, but I'm assuming that all those tie in
Yes.
to the vision of the Board of Supervisors.
They are all interrelated, and
Related,
by
so-
pulling one, you impact the others.
Yeah, so my motion would be that we include the optional general plan elements along with the mandatory.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none. And I guess for item 3, what's our, did you cover that as far as, or did we get that?
We did, Mr. Chair, but there, you
We do
may,
have a motion on the table.
I made a motion earlier, but chose to separate it so that we could get more information, but I can make the motion again unless you want to ask for more
Why
public
don't you,
comment.
is there any public comments that would help us give direction to do a RFP or RFQ to help us complete the general plan update? Seeing no public comment, Supervisor Munzer, you
Yeah,
have a
I guess
question?
I'm kind of, before we go to number 3, I just want to ask Byron, does he have clear directions on the land use designation?
Well, I think that that was going to be part of the motion on number 3, even though we have it separated, but the motion that was made earlier, it sounded like you wanted to include that as something something for the consultant to look at and see what the ramifications are, as opposed to directing staff to include it right now, to potentially include it by putting changes to the land use map in the RFP, and specifically expanding industrial and aromas and higher density residential in Tres Pinos. We can include that as something for the consultant to look at.
Okay, okay, I understand,
Okay.
thank you.
But going through the planning commission.
But, well, getting recommendations from the,
Getting recommendations from the
Consultant,
planning committee.
yeah.
Yeah, from the consultant, and how we should proceed
Right.
with those.
And I can also, we will be discussing this at the planning commission in September, too, so.
Because I think in all fairness, for the process, we should have at least the opportunity for a public to comment on those
Exactly.
designations,
Yes.
rather than make that decision today, and I think it would be a lot more transparent to do
I
so.
agree.
So, okay.
Okay, so then I'll go ahead and make my motion as I had earlier, but that I would give direction to release an RFP to staff to complete the update, but to include a separate proposal showing the special, I guess, or specific requests for land use. Is that clear enough?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll amend my second to reflect those additional
Okay.
comments.
Okay. All those in favor say aye?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
1 no. Okay. All right, is there any other further business for the board? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn till Tuesday the 10th.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you, everyone, for coming to our board meeting.